In the 1920 U.S. presidential election, the Republican primaries and convention didn't have a majority. Former General Leonard Wood was the most popular due to his military career and ties to former President Theodore Roosevelt. At the convention, Wood led on the first 4 ballots and was second on the 5th, tied for first with Loudon on the 6th, and again led on the 7th one. With neither of the 3 frontrunners able to obtain a majority, support for Harding started to grow and he won the nomination on the 10th ballot. Since nobody won the convention, dark horse candidate Warren G. Harding was selected by the Republican Party bosses in a smoke-filled room and went on to win the presidency against Democrat James Cox, whose running mate was FDR. Now you might be asking yourself, who is Leonard Wood? A year after getting his doctorate of medicine, he had been contracted by the U.S. Army to act as an assistant surgeon without a rank in 1885. He participated in the last campaign against the Apache in the summer of 1886 and would be awarded the Medal of Honor for voluntarily carrying dispatches through a region infested with hostiles, making a journey of 70 miles in one night and walking 30 miles the next day. Needless to say, Wood then received a commission in the Army after that and became personal physician to Presidents Grover Cleveland and William McKinley. At the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, Wood and Theodore Roosevelt organized the 1st Volunteer Cavalry Regiment, popularly known as the Rough Riders, where he successfully commanded the regiment during the June 24, 1898 Battle of Las Guasimas, and then at the Battle of San Juan and Kettle Hills. After the war, he became Cuba's military governor until 1902. When the United States entered World War I, Wood was widely seen as the logical choice to lead the American Expeditionary Force. However, Woodrow Resegregation Wilson held a personal grudge against Wood due to his rightful criticism of Wilson's ideology. So Wood was sent to train and organize troops in the United States to go to France, while Pershing was chosen to lead the AEF. Wood would be hit by shrapnel from a mortar in a training test in January of 1918, but by May he was preparing to go to France and command the 89th Division. But right when Wood was getting ready to leave, Wilson stuck it in again and relieved Wood for no reason. General Wood was so unhappy with the fact that his men he had trained for the past year were going to fight in France without his leadership to back them up, that he decided that Wilson sucked so much that it's time for changing things up from the inside, and he decided to run for the presidency in 1920, partially despite Wilson and undo everything terrible that Woodrow Resegregation Wilson had done after he had previously considered running in 1916. Just as a side note, at the time of this video I am currently in basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and it is freezing in the wintertime, but there's a pretty cool museum here. Anyway, back to the video. In this alternate timeline, Leonard Wood is nominated by Republicans in 1920 due to having the most support despite not having the majority. Pretty much any Republican nominated in 1920 would be able to win the election as the American public was tired of Woodrow Wilson's administration. Therefore, Wood is going to lead the United States in the post-Wilson era. For his running mate, I feel like Wood would either choose Calvin Coolidge due to how in our timeline the RNC chanted Coolidge in 1920, or Herbert Hoover because he was very popular as a humanitarian during World War I. Starting on the domestic front, President Wood would start a Theodore Roosevelt restoration, with Roosevelt's variant of progressivism, as well as a massive rolling back of Wilson's policies, which had set race relations back by decades. President Wood also would find the middle ground between conservatives and progressives in the Republican Party. On this front, I'd say that President Wood acts as a fiscal conservative with Roosevelt's previous New Nationalism platform, as well as making progress on civil rights. Turning to foreign policy, which I find more interesting, and which will have a larger impact in this alternate timeline. Unlike Harding, Wood was an internationalist and favored an active foreign policy for the United States to remain engaged in world events. And in this timeline, U.S. internationalism means keeping Germany more in check. President Wilson had been insistent that Germany lose the Kaiser and have immediate democracy. And if you know anything about regime change on the international stage, the transitional period between democracy and when a state is most vulnerable during a time of political violence, and that's exactly what happened in Weimar Germany, where literally every political ideology imaginable on the political spectrum essentially had a battle royale for power in the country through the use of paramilitaries. And due to the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles on Germany's military, the government would rely on various paramilitaries to keep each other in check and put down insurrections by the opposite political groups. In this alternate timeline, President Wood might provide more aid to Weimar Germany in their transitional period to ensure democratic institutions are better protected. Additionally, the German war debt destroyed Germany's economy, which President Wood probably provides some loans to Germany similar to the Dawes Plan, but it's a lot earlier and sees less hyperinflation in Germany. Therefore, with a somewhat better economic position, radicalism doesn't take hold in as many political groups. Ideally, I would say this prevents the rise of Hitler, but I can't say that for sure. But Wood's presidency does weaken and remove some of the conditions for which the Nazis needed to rise to power. On the Russian Civil War, U.S. troops are stationed in Russian ports to aid the White Army and provide arms and equipment. However, similar to in our timeline, morale for the Russian expeditions are low as World War I had ended, yet many American troops were still seeing combat. Russia still falls to the Bolsheviks, but the Reds may have a tougher time in taking certain areas which were supported by additional American armaments and troops. Regarding the Polish-Soviet War, the United States provides some support to Poland, which increases ties between the two countries, but also creates a stronger Polish military force that will lead to an even larger Polish victory over the Soviets in the Battle of Warsaw. In our timeline, Stalin disobeyed orders in early August 1920 when he attempted to conquer the besieged Lviv, rather than transfer his troops to assist Tukhachevsky's forces that were attacking Warsaw. Stalin was looking for personal glory, and ultimately, General Budyonny's forces marched on Lviv instead of Warsaw, and thus missed the battle as a result of Stalin's political games. In Moscow, Lenin and Trotsky both blamed Stalin for their loss in the Polish-Soviet War, as did Tukhachevsky. At the Ninth Party Congress in late September, Trotsky accused Stalin of strategic mistakes and claimed that he had sabotaged the campaign. Lenin even joined these criticisms. Stalin felt disgraced and his apathy towards Trotsky would increase. With an even worse situation for the Soviets in this alternate timeline, the loss is even further larger for the Soviets with American aid to Poland. Stalin is possibly executed in this timeline, as it's amazing that he wasn't purged in our timeline. I'll go within this alternate timeline. Stalin is executed after the Battle of Warsaw for disobeying orders and for an even larger catastrophic loss. This leads to Trotsky running the Soviet Union after the death of Vladimir Lenin in 1924. Now, while Stalin believed in the ideas of socialism in one country and building the USSR to prepare for a war in Europe, Trotsky was a hardcore internationalist in the sense that he wanted immediate global revolution and war instead of consolidation. With that, the Soviets barely have any time to lick their wounds from the Civil War before Trotsky is already calling for a renewed offensive in the Eastern European states, as he claims their populations will instantly join them. Assuming he gets his war around 1925, as he wanted to go as soon as possible, then the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine all face immediate war at once. Trotsky's war would likely go quite poorly for the Soviets, especially with American armament and support to countries at war with Trotsky. There really wouldn't be any chance of the Soviets defeating Eastern Europe. Also, it would give way for reactionary groups to come to power in Europe against a justified fear of the Bolsheviks. I don't think that Trotsky would last too long in the USSR after his failed campaign, and is likely succeeded by Nikolai Bukharin, who came from the Stalin mindset of socialism in one country. Bukharin would continue some of Trotsky's domestic industrialization, but would primarily focus on new economic plans which brought a somewhat hybrid capitalism to the Soviet Union, because guess what? Communism doesn't work and it sucks. Anyway, Bukharin's USSR focuses on rebuilding and preparing for the next war, but this time he wants to prepare a war of defense, as his rhetoric is about defending the revolution in war communism. His market socialism would also significantly benefit the Soviet economy, as people get this thing called money to buy things which aren't state-owned, and that's great. But for now, the USSR is still cut off from the rest of the world, as Bolshevism was seen very negatively, especially after Trotsky's war. Back to President Wood and the United States. The economy is good in 1924, and Leonard Wood is seen as a defender against international communism, and is re-elected in 1924. However, in his second term, the U.S. starts to go a bit more isolationist, as although Wood's policies on the world stage had proven useful in weakening the USSR during Trotsky's tenure, the American public likely sees the fall of Trotsky as a reason to start withdrawing from the world stage. Therefore, Wood begins some degree of isolationism in his second term while remaining an internationalist president. After Wood, it's likely that his vice president becomes the next president of the United States, be it Coolidge or Hoover in 1928. Regarding the impacts on the rest of the world, fascism likely still rises in Italy, but it might not rise in Germany, with a lot of Germany's issues not being as bad as they were in our timeline. However, Germany isn't all sunshines and rainbows, as right-wing reactionaries are likely elected to the government due to Trotsky's war in the mid-1920s. Weimar Germany, however, does remain under President Hindenburg for now, and has pretty good relations with the United States, and potentially with other European states like Poland and the Baltic states, just due to the Soviet threat. Skipping ahead to world events, the Second Sino-Japanese War still happens as it did in our timeline, and Pearl Harbor probably also occurs. Germany's fate is very unknown, but the situation will be very fragile. Fascist Italy is in no position to kick off World War II in Europe, as the economy was quite poor, and much of Italy's military resources were used up in Ethiopia, Albania, Libya, and the Spanish Civil War. France, on the other hand, might see even more political violence, making their situation as fragile as Germany's. Meanwhile, Bukharin's USSR is preparing for war. That is, of course, just one possible scenario for if Leonard Wood became president in 1920. What do you think would have happened? Write in the comments, and thank you for watching.